Welcome to the Lenfest Center for the Arts at Columbia University. I'm Sarah Cole. I'm the Dean of the School of the Arts, and I'm so happy to see all of you here tonight. It's going to be a great evening, a conversation between two dazzling professors and intellects, Gary Shteyngart and Bruce Robbins, who are here to talk about Gary's new novel, Vera, or Faith. So the plan is that I think you're going to read a little bit first. Yeah, we never actually discussed that, but I'm just assuming he'll read from the novel. Then the two of them will sit in those very inviting red chairs, have a conversation, and then we'll have time for discussion with the audience. And I want to send a thank you to the Book Culture. You can see where they're set up over there as well. And they have copies of the novel. And I know that Gary has agreed graciously to do some signing of books at the end if you would like. So I'm not going to say anything to set up the novel since these two will do that for us. But I do just want to say, before offering a very abbreviated, and I stress the word abbreviated, bio of our two speakers, that Gary Shteyngart is one of those writers who never ceases to amaze. He has written many books and won more accolades than I can count, cutting across genres, settings, and tone. And then there are all the articles in the New Yorker and elsewhere. Even more than the sum of its impressive parts, Gary's body of work is, I want to say, living. He speaks to so many readers around the country and the world because he's funny and brilliant and dark, all of which we need and want. And beyond that, his own character is so interesting and so appealing. He's willing to be open and honest on so many subjects. It's disarming and real. I'm sure I was not the only one here who enjoyed a recent New York Times piece about him and his exquisite and expensive taste, sprinkled, which I have a lot of sympathy for, sprinkled also with personal history. I'm so moved by Gary, too, as a member of our faculty. I was speaking last week, coincidentally, coincidental to this introduction, with a student in our MFA writing program who was lucky enough to be in Gary's thesis workshop. And we were agreeing on his being funny and friendly and creating a great atmosphere. Well, she was reporting and I was assuming all along. But what this student really wanted me to know is how smart he is and how he has the most astonishing ability to bore into the key issues in these students' writing. His attentiveness to each and every one of them really touches me. Gary is what my dad would call a class act. Now for the official intro. I'm keeping these very skeletal since trying to cover all of the work of these two scholars and writers would keep us here all night. So I strongly encourage you to read your printed program where you'll find the full bio. And you can follow them, of course, on all kinds of internet places. Gary Shteyngart, as noted, is a novelist and professor in the writing program in the School of the Arts at Columbia. He was born in Leningrad in 1972 and emigrated to the United States 7 years later. He's the author of 5 novels, along with a memoir, shorter fiction and essays, and he publishes in the most coveted journals. His work is widely read and has been translated into nearly 30 languages. Only 30? He's won many, many awards, and his books regularly appear on lists of best books and must-reads. Just a few quick examples. His memoir, Little Failure, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and was selected as one of the best books of the year by over 45 news magazines and journals around the world. Or another example, his novel Absurdistan was chosen as one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times, Book Review, and Time. And the lists go on. Bruce Robbins is the Old Dominion Foundation Professor in the Humanities in the Department of English and Comparative Literature here at Columbia, and my very dear colleague and old friend. He works mainly in the areas of literary and cultural theory, post-colonial studies, and 19th through 21st century literary studies. I say mainly, but those are very big fields. He's written many, many books which cross over among traditional academic works to much more broad-ranging and broad-reaching analyses. His most recent book, Who's Allowed to Protest, is forthcoming in early 2026. I think many of us will be interested in that, following closely on a very recent book published earlier this year by Stanford University Press entitled Atrocity, A Literary History. He has many, many other books, including several edited and co-edited volumes, and he was the editor of the journal Social Text from 1991 to 2000, its heyday. He's also directed 2 documentary films. And as I said, please consult your programs to learn more about the accomplishment of these 2 great colleagues. And now please join me in welcoming Gary Shteyngart to the podium.
I need a book, so. Hi, everyone. Ooh, this is loud. Thank you for coming on such a freezing day. Oh, what happened? What happened to summer? It's great to be here. It's great to be here with Bruce. This is probably the third time we've been together, I think. And really, this is kind of the highlight of my many tourings and going around because being interviewed by Bruce is quite an honor. This is also my 20th year at Columbia. I just realized that. I'm not good at math, but woo, yeah. That's 2 decades, I think, right? Anyone in the math department? Yeah, I think 2. Yeah, you are? Okay. That's 2 decades. It's been incredible and, never a dull moment. God bless Columbia. It's always fun. I'll read a little bit from Vera or Faith. It's really, people don't like it when people read. I've noticed that. Yeah, when I was younger, readings were like pretty intense, but now people are like, oh my God, he's going to read. But I'll read a tiny bit. The cover is the best part of the book. You can see she's shaped like a dachshund, and I'll read you a little bit about her dachshindity. If you follow me on, and I hate social media, has destroyed my life, but at Shteyngart on every social media possible, you will see that I love dachshunds more than just about anything in the world. I have a new puppy named Bernie, my socialist dachshund. He's 6 months now. A lot of fun. So each chapter has a title of She Had To and then blank. Because Vera is a 10-year-old girl who, like 10-year-olds all over our city, has way too many things that she has to do. She's very programmed, as they say. But the first thing she has to do, chapter 1, is she had to hold the family together. Because one of the things happening in this book is that her family is falling apart. So I'll read you a couple of pages from that. School started and it was awful. Predictably awful, as Ann Mom would say. A self-fulfilling prophecy, she might add, of Vera's disdain for school. I'm going to use the American Vera here instead of Vera, which is the correct way to say it. Ann Mom was always predicting things in the near future. I'm the Nostradamus of 2 weeks from now, she told Vera over and over again, and Vera knew the correct social response was to laugh, because Ann Mom was trying to be as witty as Daddy. Though when Vera became a teenager in 3 years, she could roll her eyes because she had seen it done on television, and sometimes on the devices Ann Mom didn't allow her. She added Nostradamus to her Things I Still Need to Know diary. She's keeping this diary of things she still needs to know. It's like a giant vocabulary hoard. I still have one. The hallways of the school were of faded red and pink and orange, and there were motivational posters and funny sayings from the Peanuts gang and dusty green floors, and mesh over the windows looking onto the rump of another sad uptown building. Daddy compared the color scheme to, quote, an ice cream shop in hell, unquote. And Ann Mom had yelled at him not to use that language. You know she's going to imitate you. She worships you, she said. Or to talk the school down. The school was a point of pride for Daddy because you had to take a test when you were only 4 years old to get in, and you needed to score in the 99th percentile. Although Vera had overheard that Dylan had been admitted because they wanted to keep siblings together, and she thought this contrast between their intelligence to be exquisite and delectable, 2 words Ann Mom wanted her to drop if she were to ever make any friends at her school. Both my kids go to public school, Daddy had once declared on television, while some other men in suits and ties were yelling at him about his politics, although he had failed to mention that it was a school for super bright kids, and that made her sad. There were a lot of statuses in the world, and each year she was becoming aware of more of them. For example, it also made her sad when Daddy sat apart from them on planes because he always had a ticket in business class. And just this summer, when they had flown to Korea and Japan, where Daddy had to deliver some speeches, she had asked him, why can't you fly with us in family class? And he said, aw, poor Doxy. Despite being short, she was shaped, lean and tubular like a dachshund. Then he bent down and grizzled her forehead with his stubble, and it hurt the whole ride back. and she didn't see a lick, as Ann Mom would say, of him for 14 hours straight. Not that she saw that much of him at home either.
Okay. Gary read, and I'm going to read some of the same again, just because it's really good, and I want you to get a sense of how good it is. Am I the right distance from this? Okay. So the end of that first paragraph, I'm the Nostradamus of 2 weeks from now, she told Vera over and over again. And Vera knew the correct social response was to laugh, because Ann Mom was trying to be as witty as Daddy. Though when Vera became a teenager, in 3 years, she could roll her eyes, because she had seen it done on television and sometimes on the devices Ann Mom didn't allow her. I will get to a question eventually, all right? I'm just going to say, I'm not there yet. I think this is a brilliant sentence. So it's telling you, it's suggesting something that's going to be clearer afterwards, that she's on the spectrum, right? And has trouble picking up social cues, is trying to learn social cues. So, you know, she knew the correct social response was to laugh. It seems to me that there's, all right, I'm not going to kind of do close analysis here, but she likes her father better than her mother. And the story is going to be a little bit about getting to like her mother more. And you can kind of see it happening here, because when Vera became a teenager in 3 years, she could roll her eyes because she had seen it done on television. Okay, on the spectrum, so, you know, could roll her eyes. She knows, you know, that she's going to be allowed to roll her eyes. But the suggestion here, which is really subtle, but sets you up for later, is she doesn't really want to roll her eyes at her mother. She knows that, you know, it's there to be done, but she's not, you know, that there's just a little backing off of her desire to roll her eyes. I could go on, all right? So this is not a question.
I love this. This is great. No, this is why you know I like seeing Bruce more than other people on stage, because I do not perform this kind of textual analysis. Obviously, when I write it, but you're absolutely correct on all of it. In fact, when I started writing this, I didn't start with the premise. Okay, she's on the spectrum. This is the kind of child I think I was, the kind of child I know. My son does go to a gifted and talented school where everyone's kind of like that, or the majority of people are like that. So I didn't start with that presupposition, but everything you say is true, and especially about the way that she is functioning on two things. One, she's trying to pick up social cues, which she cannot do simply because of the way she's wired neurodivergently. And the other part is that she's already creating this roadmap for herself of her two parents. And even though they're always fighting, she's trying to create a version where she can sort of sense who she wants to emulate, whom she doesn't want to emulate, who she needs to manipulate to get something from. And the other part of this, which is highly autobiographical, is that when I was growing up, this was exactly how I mean, I was also kind of, the fact that I didn't speak English when I came to this country created yet another barrier, which Vera, obviously having been born in this country, doesn't have. But it's always reading social cues. I would say to this day, it's been reading social cues. Often I will, you know, when I have to walk up, I'm fine on stage talking about art or writing, but, you know, if I have to buy a bagel, you know, I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and I kept worrying that I was going to say something wrong as I bought a bagel there, although it's the same bagel and basically the same kind of person selling it. But I would prepare a whole speech in my mind how to say it. And so it's really interesting to think of how being a foreigner in this country in the beginning of my life prepared a sense of constantly re-examining social cues, so which I was able to do for a girl who's 10 and, as you were saying, neurodivergent. Also interesting that it was only, as I said, I never quite thought about that part of it, but when I started doing interviews for this book, everybody started also by saying, oh, you wrote about this autistic girl. And I was like, did I? And then I thought, yes, I did.
Well, the real I hadn't planned on reading that first sentence. I just, it struck me what a great first sentence. And what I was going to ask you is, how come you chose a 10-year-old autistic girl? And you kind of started to answer that, or maybe you did answer it already.
Yeah, why did I choose? Well, first of all, I never thought I would write about any kind of young person because I never thought I would be, I never thought I'd have a kid. I have a 12-year-old son. I was of that generation in the 90s, the Kurt Cobain adjacent generation where we just wanted to drink and drug ourselves into oblivion and then produce some kind of work alongside it. But we're all going to die in our early 50s. Which, I'm 53, which for a Russian is pretty old already. For a Russian male, I should say women, but forever. But so it was, that definitely wasn't a plan. But then when I had a child, I thought, oh, he's interesting. And I thought I really need some return on investment from this kid because, they're very expensive in New York, these kids, even if they do get into one of these schools, which are free. But so I decided to, and then when it came time to write, why a girl? Because I think girls at that age just have a much more deeper emotional well than boys. I know I'm being really generalizing here, but I think that is true. Men do catch up in their late 40s, but for a while, it takes a couple of decades to get there. So I really thought that Vera was the right instrument for this kind of book. Now, just to add one more thing, that paragraph, which you read better than I read, I really.
It's a talent I have.
You do have a talent. You have a really good voice. It came to me, almost everything I start now that works out as a novel starts when I'm flying on an airplane. At 30,000 feet, there's a weird kind of emotional access and resonance. I'm not the only person that have noticed this. Many people cry on airplanes. I have been, for the last 2 or 3 books, they've all started on airplanes. And this character, I was working on this character for a while, but I really wrote that paragraph on a long transatlantic flight. And what I always say when I teach for the last 20 years here, I always talk about the importance of finding this voice, which I know sounds obvious, right? You're going to have to find a voice. But for me, I think if you don't find it, the last 3 books I've written, there have been 200-page drafts of something that never worked out because I never got that paragraph. And then I would be like, well, it'll come later. I'll just circle back to it. But yeah, sometimes that happens, but not for me. For me, I have to get that voice in the paragraph exactly right. Paragraph leading to a page, leading to a couple of pages. After that's done, you can have many, many versions of a novel, but once you've established the voice and you feel that kind of closeness to her where you analyze this on a textual level, but I was just floating on it instinctually. This is who she is, right? So I didn't, and so once you get that, you're done to a large extent. I mean, yes, the hard work then, especially for writers who hate plot, like most good literary fiction writers, who said plot is an embarrassment. I can't remember who said that. The 50s, I think. But yes, it's hard work, but you already know that it's going to work out in the end.
So I'm just going to say, personal witnessing, spending the kind of time, if you haven't read it yet, you'll see when you do, in the consciousness of this 10-year-old girl is an amazing experience. That's not a question. So, it's very, very powerful. So when you got that voice in that paragraph, you got something. I'm going to try a couple of other answers to the question of why a 10-year-old autistic girl, and you could just sort of say, nope, not at all. I mean, I was impressed, with what you said about the experience of it being a Russian kid, not speaking English, and trying to learn the social cues. But it also suggested to me that what 10-year-old is not trying to learn the social cues, right? There's a kind of everyman quality to this, which I think works really, really well. And then there's another level of it, at least that this occurred to me, and you can say no. So there's strong political satire in this novel, and there's I don't want to push this in any particular direction, but let's say an interest in the psychology of the sort of MAGA base, in relation to people like, people like us. If you can say you're not part of us, if you're not part of us, it's fine. No, it's not fine actually, but
Bit of a problem. Yeah.
yeah, it would be a problem. Anyway, I'm just thinking, so a super intelligent girl who's got social awkwardness and has trouble making friends. This isn't kind of a parable of the way we look to them, that is really, really smart, but not good at making friends. Certainly not good at making friends with us, other people. It just felt like it was part of the elitism, anti-elitism thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think this is, and also the book, going off of that, the book is also kind of a critique of elitist education, because the kind of education she gets prepares her dreams to be a woman in STEM. I don't know where she picked that up, but she keeps using that phrase. And she needs to go to Swarthmore because that's where her daddy has plotted her out for her. So she has all these things that she needs to, as per those titles, that she needs to do. But you're right. I wrote a piece last year, which was the most read thing I've ever written, which was a cruise. I went on a cruise. The world, and cruises are horrifying for anyone who has been on it. On the world's largest ship, I did this for the Atlantic, and it was read by gazillions of people, including people who cruise, who are like a cult, and they would call me in the middle of the night with death threats. You don't want to. And there is a kind of MAGA valence to that crowd, but also the critique was that I, as a non-cruiser, went on the world's largest ship and, using my intelligence, critiqued them, which is, instead of making friends. And God knows I tried to make friends on the ship. I even wore a Daddy's Little Meatball T-shirt that I thought would make me many, many friends, and was really shocked when that turned out to be the opposite. But I realized, that, again, the reading cues. So what I needed to do, if I had been smart, socially smart, I would have, really read up on football, which is a sport I know nothing about, because that's the only thing people on the ship talked about. But I didn't know that. I thought, and again, and people like us, as you were saying, don't know that. I was tweeting on this ship when I was on it, and Joyce Carol's tweeted back and said, "Oh, Gary, what's the library like on this ship?" And I thought, JC, oh my God, library? The only book anybody was reading was, The Real Dr. Fauci by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So it's a kind of, it's a, what do they call it in academia, category error or something like that, that these things are not really, there's no real cross current between them. And I think even though she goes to a school where kids are a lot like her, and it's an elitist school in many ways, she does have one more step to take before she can access that. And it is, and Mom, God bless her, is trying to help by telling her, don't use words like delectable. It's not, it's not age appropriate. And the other thing that she keeps telling her mom keeps telling her is, oh, you'll make friends in college, which is something I think a lot of people like Vera would hear growing up. Also interesting to me when I was, a part of this very long tour is people saying I was Vera growing up. And it made me think that readers are, I mean, if there's one way to describe Vera, it's anxious. And one can talk about anxiety being a part of neurodivergence, or at least one part of it. But I think to be a reader requires a kind of anxiousness about the world, because you're desperately trying to figure out what the world is, and you want language, like Vera's word hoard. You need this whole stack of language to figure out the way the world works. And I think anxious people become really good readers, and people who don't read a lot maybe don't have that kind of anxiety, at least when it comes to figuring out what the world is and how to interact with it, and how to interact with real life human beings.
Do you feel like telling the people about the political side of the novel? I mean, you might not,
no,
but it's got some brilliant stuff in it. I mean, like the 5-3.
Well, the brilliant stuff is, when I wrote Super's That True Love Story, which was another dystopian book I wrote that in 2010. Almost all of it has taken place, but it took until about this year. So, for example, there's a war in Venezuela in that book, and then there's National Guard troops in the streets of cities, which in 2010 all of this sounded like complete science fiction. So it took 15 years. This book took a day to come true. So In the book, there's this 5/3 amendment where people who can trace their heritage to the Revolutionary War and still not be have come to this country in shackles, in other words, in white, get 5/3 of a vote. And they are called exceptional Americans. The book comes out July 7th, July 8th. J.D. Vance gave a speech about exceptional Americans, which he tied to the Civil War, going back to the Civil War, not Revolutionary War, God bless him. And I was thinking, what the hell? It takes, this is why there's no such thing as writing about the present anymore. I mean, how, it's like I know Usha Vance is a really good reader. So could she have read this very short book and just said, hey, JD, I got this great idea to disenfranchise our kids even more. Let's do that. But it really makes me feel like there's a kind of animus people sometimes have against dystopian or speculative fiction, but I think there's no room for almost any other kind of fiction. There's historical fiction, I guess, but if you're writing about the present, you're writing about the future because there really is no present left.
You made a mistake when you were reading. I forgive you myself, but you left out the word raffish. You left out raffish. And raffish is one of the many words in this novel which could get quotation marks, like exquisite and delectable. Exquisite and delectable, you'll remember, got quotation marks. I have never read anything that is so dense in quotation marks, which are all so funny, right? But like funny in different ways. I wrote some of them down, but you can get tired writing them all out. I've gotten just about as far as one can with a name like Igor Shmokin, Daddy was saying, as he vigorously sipped his third martini. Nothing tiny about that martini, Aunt Cecile had joked. So it's vigorously, for example. Probably a lot of these people are themselves writers or have students of yours in writing, right? Adverbs, they tell people to take them out. I mean, it sounded like there was a little bit of a creative writing lesson in here. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. And in fact, my editors, especially the copy editors, took out a lot of quotation marks. They especially said, don't repeat. If she repeats something, take the quotation marks off. Because it is a little bit of an imposition as you're reading. It's not exactly, David Foster Wallace's footnotes, but it is a bit of an imposition when you constantly have to, oh God, there's more quotation marks. But I did enjoy doing that. Again, every rule is meant to be broken once you figure out what all the rules are. But first you have to sort of figure out what they are. And then the constant use of words that are taken out sort of by the use of quotation marks that are placed in a slightly different category reminded me of when I was growing up, how my whole family, it was like a family project to learn English. And my father, like all Soviet emigres at the time, was a computer programmer. And so we had all these, this is from a very specific era, these computer punch cards. Remember those? COBOL and Fortran, those languages? They had them lying around, and on one side we would write something in English, and then on the other side we'd write it in Russian. So all the words that every Russian loves, like infarct, stroke, diabetes, all the things that were going to kill us sooner rather than later. And we just quiz each other all the time. So for me, the idea of having like stacks of words scattered all over your apartment was something that really made sense in it. And in Vera's case, she has this little diary that she constantly scribbles in.
So let me ask you about whether there are other novelists that you were either inspired by or thinking about when you were doing this. I mean, I'm sure people have asked you about what Maisie knew, but also maybe about Nabokov, only because of the title.
The title, but it's so funny. I love Nabokov, but I really don't like Ada or Ardor, which people think of. It's just too big. I don't know. I'm sorry. This is my first book under 300 pages. I'm so proud of that. I think it's just, if you can do something shorter rather than longer and get what you want across, I think that's really great. And my favorite Nabokov book, which I teach here at Columbia, is Pnin, his most humane book.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Yes, it's Pnin. Well, Pnin is, Pnin
trying
is,
to learn the cues.
Exactly, learning the cues. And he's, Pnin is childlike in some ways, right? So Huge influence, obviously. Strangely enough, the whole book really came to me, and you're right about what Maisie knew, but which also is not my favorite of Henry James's novels. I mean, kudos to him for writing a book from a divorce book from a child's point of view. But what the the thing that really influenced me, also on a gigantic trans-Pacific flight from Tokyo to New York, was at midnight, after a few martinis or martinis, as Vera would say, was Kramer versus Kramer, which was the 80s movie, which I loved as a child because my parents were fighting every minute of every day. And just like Vera, I also had to hold them together. So I would constantly, Vera makes these lists of why they should stay together, one for mom, one for dad. And that's what I would do, in my horrible Russian penmanship, the 10 reasons you should stay together. And I was watching Kramer versus, we watched it when we came to this country. I couldn't understand the English of, Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman, but I thought, oh, this is such a nice way to fight. Americans fight so tenderly without no one's throwing a frying pan at each other or anything like that. It was much different. But I loved that movie despite not understanding it. And in seeing it, I thought there was a kid in there, Billy or Bobby, I don't know, a child actor, and I completely forgot that he even existed. You just think of it as this battle royale between these two, but obviously he's one of the focal points. And I thought, what would it be like to write a book from where it's the child's point of view, which of course led me, yes, to reread what Maisie knew. And I have to say that if there's three different sort of things that happen on the personal side, not the political side, but on the personal side, it's her trying to keep her parents together, searching for her birth mom, because Ann mom is an adoptive mom who's not, her birth mom is Korean American. She is Ann mom is very much a blue blood WASP from Boston. And the third part of it is making a friend, which I think in some ways is the most important part, because while she is trying to figure out who she is, the desperate need for somebody who is a peer who can take care of her emotionally is just so high in her mind. It's just one of the most important parts of the book. Spoiler alert, she does make a friend. I never do this, but because I just couldn't let her dangle in the wind. Vera means faith in Russian, and I had a kind of faith in this character because usually my characters are these kind of, I don't know, sort of a cross between a schmuck and a nebbish, or schnebbish, if you will. But this character, obviously, I couldn't do that to a 10-year-old girl. I have a much different kind of feeling for someone like her. And also, because the book deals with the future and politics, I had to have some kind of faith that this generation could undo some of the damage that my generation has done to this country and to the world. We haven't left these kids with quite a whole lot to work with. So Vera is sort of an act of faith. Writing her was a kind of act of faith in some ways.
That's a lovely way to put it. I have not wanted to spoil anything and sort of stayed away when I was thinking about this from the plot, but it's really got one. You may think the plot is embarrassing, but there is one, and it's definitely worth reading also for the plot. I hope I'm not screwing things up. I would be really curious to hear what other people might want to ask Gary. Is it too soon for me to do this? You have any questions?
Concerns?
No, not concerns, questions. Somebody's definitely got to have.
Thank you. I was curious. Well, okay, thank you. I was curious why you chose Korean instead of anything else.
That's a good question. Why did I choose Korean? It's interesting. I think at this stage in my life, I probably know more Koreans than Russians. No, that's absolutely true. And my previous work has also involved Koreans quite a bit. I went to this horrible, when I came to America, I went to this horrible yeshiva, is there any other kind? And surrounded by very rich kids who really made my life a living hell. And my liberation day was when I went to a gifted and talented school called Stuyvesant, this kind of nerd high school in Manhattan, where almost everybody was an immigrant. And the predominant groups were Chinese, Korean, Indian, and Korean and Indian, I think, are the people that I made the closest friends that I still have. And then it kind of became this giant cascading effect. My mentor, Chang-Rae Lee, was a Korean American writer, one of the greats. I teach him also at Columbia. My wife's Korean American. Two of my best friends are Korean American. I think my dachshund is Korean. I can't quite tell, but when kimchi comes out, he's like extra wagging in the tail department. So, and by the way, Russians and Koreans, including cabbage, have a lot in common. I think a lot of these same kinds of truly drama-driven parental units, stress on academics, stress on cabbage, although Koreans do it much better. So there's a lot in common. There's specific groups that I've written about who formed huge parts of my friend groups, Korean Americans, Gujarati Indians, to be specific. I have like 20 friends, and when I go to India, they're, wild time. But immigrants are really the thing that I've been most interested in as a group. It's sometimes, and Mom is the first time I've written about like a waspy American, I think, at length.
Not just Waspy, with Brad, is it Bradstreet?
Bradford.
So not Bradstreet. Sorry.
Yeah.
Close, though.
Close. Yeah. No, and is because recently I've made my first waspy friends. It only took me like 45 years in this country. Amor Toll's the writer, Adam Platt, the what do you call it, the food critic. So I'm fascinated by their incredible, ways and means, the things they do. They've taught me all about mayonnaise and stuff like that, and I'm thankful. I feel very, like I really understand this part. But for the longest part in my life, it's been writing about the different immigrant experiences, because my whole life has been this endless intertwining of different immigrant groups. So yeah, that's what made sense when I was writing about her heritage.
I was curious when you were talking about all of your novels beginning on flights. That was the thing that struck me, and I have a similar experience of being in a heightened state of emotion on planes all the time. I remember, this is just an anecdote, but I remember watching the film Supernova with Colin Firth, and which is a very sad film, but just weeping for about 3 hours after watching the film. Anyway, I was curious as to the kind of literal point of conception for this novel, the point of inspiration that struck you, and also perhaps this is something that you teach in your writing classes. I've not been privileged to be a part of your writing program, but
come on down.
I would love to. But do you have a particular kind of writing ritual or writing system, and do you prefer analog or digital?
Okay, these are all great questions. Yeah, it is really something that whole, and it's a cliche, the fact that we all are of heightened awareness when we're on a plane, but it's one of those cliches that's incredibly true, but also incredibly helpful if, I assume, you're also in some creative field. For example, a movie that probably wouldn't have had the kind of effect on me on the ground was the last Wim Wenders film about a janitor in a Tokyo bathroom. What's it called? Perfect Days. Thank you. I was just floored by that movie. I don't know. Now I have to, as a control group, or control experiment for those of you in the natural sciences, I have to watch it on land and see what happens. But I was absolutely devastated by the time I landed. And again, a trans-Pacific flight, and I just got off as like a piece of jelly. And I was doing a creative project, and it really helped in that way too. When does the moment strike? The moment of inspiration? I don't know if there is one moment. I would say in watching my kid and seeing his successes and failures socially, I was taken back to my successes and failures socially when I was a kid. They're different, but they're the same. He's genetically so much like me. Of course he's going to be an anxious kid like me, and he's going to be, have a lot of the same tics and hang-ups, but also the same, he's a funny guy too, which I was hopefully as well, and creative in certain ways, different ways than me, but creative in certain ways. So I would say that just watching him over the years, one thing leads to another, leads to another. You're creating a back catalog of all the different things that you want to write about. It's so awful because you want to just have a child and not think of them as, but being a writer, Saul Bellow, who, is a bit problematic these days, but Saul Bellow would call a writer, the great noticer. You have to notice. And obviously, you're going to notice the people in your household to their detriment. I can't remember who it was. I think it was that Polish poet, was it Zaborska? No, who said, when when a writer is born, a family dies, or something like that. It was even more Eastern European in her saying, or I think it was her. Anyway, but yeah, I mean that's a little bit of an overstatement, and hopefully not true of my kid. But yes, there is, I think, a sense of you have to pay attention. How do you not pay attention? How can you claim to be a writer if you're not invested in the people around you and trying to figure out what makes them tick? As for writing schedules, I don't know. Coffee is the great equalizer for all of this. I would say I do. I would say there's diminishing returns after 2 or 3 hours of work. Don't do more than that. Most writers I know work 2 or 3 hours, then they cry for about 4 hours for the state of publishing. Then they see their shrink, and then drinking. Sometimes a hobby. I have a couple of hobbies that substitute for drinking, but not that I don't drink. But in any case, 2 or 3 hours, this book, because I had written 200 pages that my editor, he's very diplomatic, and he never says, oh, this really sucks. He says, Gary, what do you think this book is about? Which I know means start, back to square one. And so I've never missed a deadline. I'm very immigrant like that. And I had 51 days left to write this book once it was approved, and I just went nuts and wrote, like, instead of the usual 2 or 3 hours. Maybe that's why the plotting works, because I never had to work in such a compressed amount of time that I always knew exactly where we were in the book, instead of the usual 2-year tour of going back and forth, and then 300 pages worth of or 600 pages worth of actual work that becomes 300 pages. So maybe that's why the plotting worked out. But I went absolutely nuts. In fact, I started developing vertigo, which I've never had. And like many writers I write in bed. Proust did. And I couldn't get out of bed. I would just keel over. I had to see a vertigo specialist. If any of you has vertigo, Dr. Roma is his name. Oh, beautiful. And he put me in a space helmet with diodes going off. Then he threw me on a couch. There's all these things you test for. There's some kind of crystal floating around, supposedly. But then he said, I think this is psychiatric. If I had a ruble for every time somebody said that to me, I'd be richer than Putin. But the moment I finished the book and my editor approved of it, it went away almost immediately. So, sorry, it's not really an answer to the question, but I think the main thing, maybe the takeaway is, don't push yourself for more than a couple hours of this kind of work. In editing, it's different. When you have a draft down already, then you can go back and work much longer because it's more, it's more instrumental stuff rather than going off of this inspiration. I never write more than 2 or 3 pages per day in my first draft. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You go first. Oh, okay. This is short. Hi, Gary.
Hi, how are you?
Can you just give us a tip or maybe 2 tips about how to be funny?
I know you. You're funny. How to be funny? Jesus Christ. Well, I'm teaching a class, which you're welcome to audit, called "So You Want to Write Funny" at Columbia this semester at the School of the Arts. And I mean, that's interesting because a lot of the funny people I know just aren't that funny in real life. I worked with Ben Stiller on a project. He's super funny on the screen, but in real life, he's just average. He's not all that funny. How to be funny? I think it's a skill that I set myself to learn. First of all, my parents still are very, very funny and in a very caustic kind of way, but because there's no gating for them, right? So they say whatever's on their mind. A lot of immigrant parents do, but and they would always tell jokes, Soviet jokes when I was a kid, Brezhnev jokes, all that stuff. So I knew in the beginning that that humor was a form of sort of political pushback. I just did a piece in the Times about, I attended one of the, what is it called, tactical frivolity, one of those protests that they have where people dress like chickens and frogs and stuff like that to protest no kings and other days. That really works, you know. But what I teach in this class, a preview for those who are taking it, is you know that humor, it's like this ICBM, if we're talking Cold War, like this intercontinental ballistic missile, and the humor are the rocket stages of it, but the thing you want to get across, the payload, is the tragedy. So you can't have one without the other, for me. The tragedy is what needs to land and explode, sorry, killing millions, obviously, but the humor is what gets you across the ocean to strike your target. This is a horrible, horrible analogy. But I really do believe in that I think the humor is very instrumental. I love reading books that aren't funny. I'm just doing a piece on the South African writer James Coetzee, who I really think is super not funny.
He is not funny.
Not funny. Not funny. But it's, you know, he is one of the authors that I can stomach who isn't at all funny. But usually I think of it as a turnoff. I think humor adds something to these works, even and if it's just humor for the sake of being humor, then forget it. I don't want to read it at all. But when the two of these things work together in concert, you get something that, because I still think of writing as a form of entertainment. And I know that's not kosher to some people, you know, maybe even in MFA programs. It's supposed to be this high art, and it should be a high art, but one doesn't preclude the other. You know, I think so many of the writers of the 19th and 20th century that I admire so much entertain the crap out of it. I mean, in different ways, you know. Chekhov could entertain you in the way that he dealt with the foibles of of Russia's middle class, burgeoning middle class, part of the aristocratic class. Nabokov could entertain you in the way he styled sentences that could be read as being funny or unique or having some kind of very different approach. Even someone like Mary Gaitskill could entertain you in the fact that she's so super blunt in everything that she writes that you're just going to be constantly smacked around by, you know, with her incredible bluntness. So different approaches to it, but I still think that entertaining is something that writers need to strive for. It's not just that we're committing a work of art. Sorry, but if you need to, you could talk to me, you know, after class, and I'll do funny with you. You could do funny back and forth.
Okay. Hello, Gary. As I took your so you want to write funny class last year, and it was indeed very.
You want your money back? Well,
No. I'm getting to a question, but I just want to say briefly that the line about "you'll make friends in college" was something that I heard verbatim from my mother, and it has mostly held true. But I will say that when I was like 7 or 8, I learned for the first time about like the eventual heat death of the universe and had an existential crisis. And yes,
we all went through that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that was where that phrase came from her. But anyways, my question is about your speculative fiction, the speculative aspects of what you write. And I don't know if it's exactly bragging rights to have had these things come true, but certainly there's a prescience in this tragicomedy that you've put forth in this book and in your previous book. So I was wondering how you think of those elements. Is it more like an intuitive, what's going to serve the story, or are you looking at the news? Like how do you figure out those elements?
Yeah, well, thank you. These are all great questions. I think, you know, all these gifted and talented schools like Stuyvesant should just have a giant sign over the, over the front of the building where it says "You'll make friends in college" or something like that. That should be the opening salvo of these schools. Look, two things I think in terms of whatever impressions I've had. One is growing up in an authoritarian system, because in some ways, and yeah, there's a difference between left and right systems, but in some ways they all end up in the same place. It's the same things, the same types of coercion and social engineering and all this different stuff, the same corruption. And, you know, I always thought that over the years, Russia would become more and more like America, and America's becoming more and more like Russia. So all of these confluences are, you know, they come really easily for me. Like, And the other part of it was I when I wrote Super Sad, I got into got the first, what was it, MySpace? I think it was called. Ooh. And the moment I saw it, I was like, okay, democracy's over, because I just had this feeling where anybody could publish anything and have as much expertise as anybody else. I just thought this can't be good. So knowing all these things, and also, Vera, it's interesting to think about it because Vera, she thinks about the political order of things, but she also doesn't, and I find that these kids, including my kid, and the people around him, and his peers, they are constantly exposed to this dystopia to the point where it leaches into their consciousness, and they themselves prefer reading dystopian books because it's what they know. I remember as a kid, I think I knew all the members of the Politburo by heart, and my kid knows like Stephen Miller's wife's name by heart. It's like it's the one that's having an affair with Elon Musk. He knows that too, right? As a 12-year-old. So I think authoritarian systems require a different kind of attention from young people, which is absolutely frightening. And I think that kind of mistrust of society, of the world, of the people around them, persists into the rest of your life. You're people like my parents who grew up under Stalin obviously have it much worse, and there's a complete lack of trust in society or even the concept of society. But I think to some extent, even growing up as I did, leaving the Soviet Union as I did, and then coming to Reagan's America, there is obviously a huge sense of something you can never think. I mean, how could I write a utopia, let's say? People keep asking me to write one because they seem to come true. But I wouldn't even know where to begin. I'm like a sap, a Soviet Ashkenazi pessimist. Like it's not even that the glass is half full. Like there's no glass. There's no table. It's just floor.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I was one of your students.
Yes.
So I don't know why I'm saying hi like that. But what I was gonna say is obviously, or I don't want to speak for everyone, but I feel like as we grow up, like our childhood selves never really leave us, but we're also like severing off parts of our child self so that we're not like however old and afraid of the dark or whatever it is. But and I know that a lot of this was channeled through the experience of like having your own child. But was there any part about writing this book and like accessing your childhood self that surprised you?
This is a very good question. And I think you're absolutely right about this idea of the fact that that life is a lifelong process of really negotiating our relationship to our childhood, figuring out. Because people always say, "Oh, there's a whole industry in helping people recover their childhood selves." And America's in love with this idea that it was really our innocent self that's the one we should access. Now, look, some of this obviously is true. Children are sweeter because they haven't been through all the processes that make assholes out of people, right? So yes, there is something to be said for recovering that. But also, becoming an adult means we're taking responsibility for everyone and everything around you, which is something children just simply don't have to do. So in trying to access this. And there is a kind of, to Trump and the MAGA element, there is a kind of, let's go back to our childhood selves. Let's pick the bully option on this, but, let's go back to that and get rid of all this idea that we're in a society, that we need to take care of each other. All that is just garbage that isn't real. That is the childhood part of it that's real. So obviously there's pros and cons to both this incredible attachment to childhood. Some writers, of course, the Salingers of the world, they never left childhood. And they could, you could produce 2 or 3 great books while being in that mode for sure. But then after a while, what do you do with the rest of your life? I found that the big break in dealing with childhood for me, because the first 3 or 4 books had characters that were so much like me. But I was trying to do something. I was trying to write about this particular experience of Soviet Jews from the 1970s that emigrated, blah, blah, blah. A very particular set of people that hadn't had a book written about them yet when I started writing. So that was my mission. But once I wrote my memoir, my 4th book, in which I talked ad nauseum about this whole, that particular experience, I felt that I'd finally in some ways broken that tie to childhood, because it was all written out. if you read that book, there's nothing about my childhood. It's too much, really. You know too much. I've written too much. And that was sad to say goodbye to my younger self that way. And then the next books I wrote were very much about, the main character in the next book, Like Success, was this annoying hedge fund guy on this cross-country trip and stuff like that, dealing with characters with whom I did not share a childhood. He was native born in America, etc. But yes, having a child did, as you're suggesting in your question, it did remind me of a lot of it. I think it was the social component that it reminded me of. Walking into a room full of squealing kids my age, not knowing what to say, then saying it anyway and getting it wrong. And then processing the response, which was always negative. And then trying to create another response. It was like this endless large language model that AI is being trained on, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because there's a kind of, I don't know, my shrink and I always talk about whether I am or was, or I guess still am, neurodivergent or not, but certainly the not understanding English component, not understanding how to craft a sentence that would sound like I'm talking to my peers, right? Which is Vera's problem, right? So all of that was brought up by having a kid, and especially a kid who's surrounded by kids who also, I think, miss a lot of cues and are super smart. And also that kind of the difference between one's intellectual intelligence and one's emotional intelligence, when those things aren't in sync, and I think they rarely are, especially if we're, in graduate school. I think many people, not just writers, but people in all segments may have grown up with those two things being out of sync. Generalizing a little bit, but I think, and there's something very interesting when you know that you know a lot about the world, but it's not the stuff that's useful to basic daily living. And that's sort of Vera's problem. Yes, she knows so much more. She is a woman in STEM at age 10, but it's not helping her, feel good about herself at the end of the day. And that was sort of the problem posed by the book.
Before the mic gets to someone else, I'm going to ask you a question too. It felt like you were very self-consciously almost tantalizing people with the idea that you were working on yourself in the father character. And I thought you might want to say something about that without spoiler alerts and so on.
Look, there's always kind of a schmuck in my novels. Especially in a book like this, where Vera is as sweet and innocent and kind and earnest the characters I've ever written. There's going to be some kind of foil for her, and the foil I decided to use was a kind of. I often have like a character who's like me, but usually he's failed in some way. Her father, Igor, and that's my Russian name actually, is failing. He's trying to make a magazine to rival the New Yorker, but he just can't pull it off, and he keeps. And I'm not going to reveal more, but he does horrible, horrible things throughout the book. And I enjoy writing those kinds of versions of me. I mean, I'm not perfect, but I'm also not, actively trying to destroy the world as Igor Shmulkin is. But it's really fun to do that, to imagine a different. Because to become a writer, I like all immigrant children, I wasn't supposed to be doing this at all. I was supposed to go to law school. My parents would always say, "Oh, you're too dumb for medical school, so law school." But I worked as a paralegal for a year, and clearly that wasn't good for anybody. And I just stuck to this. But I think if I hadn't succeeded, I don't know, I'd be in really deep crap because I'm not good. I have no attention to detail like many writers in the outer world. So I don't know what kind of job I'd have. I don't know if I'd have any job. So, but I like to play around with this idea of what the other me, who isn't employed gainfully by Columbia, would look like.
He's Russian. He's witty. He's very funny. And I'm sorry, there are people going to say that reminds me a little bit.
That's fine. That's fine. No, I've used myself as a model for characters, but again, like just a writer writing about another writer. I don't know. Actually, no. Let me take that back. When I started teaching at Columbia, there were novels that my students were writing about writers and about MFA programs sometimes, and I'd be like, no, you can't do that. But the rules have changed. I think it's okay to do that now because this whole writing and academia and writing has become its own strange subject that is actually kind of interesting in academia after the last couple of years. I think the campus novel just might be back because this is again where the sausage is sort of being made, the cultural sausage, if you will. Sorry, that's a horrible metaphor again. Missiles, sausages, God, just shoot me. But yeah, I think it might be back. A couple of novelists have been working on that recently. So yeah, you are hence given permission to.
If anybody writes one, you're going to date it back to this moment.
Yeah,
Okay.
Gary said okay. You go first. I think there's a question.
I'm wondering about Vera's evolving sense of religion and whether or not you're evolving to an atheist. That was question number one. And question number two is I read your piece, of course, about your friend piece about wearing your T-shirt on a boat. And I have to think that had to be provocative. Didn't fit right in, or did it? I really don't know.
No, well, I thought Daddy's Little Meatball was funny. Like people would come up, I thought people would come up to me and be like, "Oh, you're a meatball, all right," and I'd be like, "Yeah, I like meatballs. I like my dad." No, so okay, maybe I should have known it was going to be a disaster. No, I thought it was going to be an icebreaker on this ship where everybody was wearing like the T-shirt of their football team. I should have worn what team do we have? I don't even know, but whatever it was, I should have worn that. Oi, okay. So yes, I no, that was not meant to be provocative. And sorry, your first question was the religion. Yes. Jeez. I mean, Vera, like I said, her name is Faith. In a sense, the search for a birth mother, which is an important part of this book, is a search for some kind of higher meaning that Ann Mom and her schmuck of a father have not been able to provide for her. So yeah, I would say in that way, for sure. My own journey, and here I ask, if you haven't already, to refer to a New Yorker piece I wrote about my circumcision, which has been made yes, you know about it, which has been made into a really good documentary, sadly a short, about 20 minutes, that the New Yorker released, just put in Shteyngart, New York film circumcision. Yeah. We will have many results, sadly. So I would say that nothing has been crueler in my life than religion to me, because first it was the 8 years of pure hell that I suffered in a religious school, where every day was a different kind of torture. I remember we come like all Soviets. We loved eating kielbasa, which is a pork sausage, and me and this kid Sasha or Boris, we'd go into the bathroom and eat like little hamsters, just eat all this kielbasa. And one day the rabbi broke into our stall and said, "It's because of you the Holocaust happened." And we were probably like Vera's age, and I remember just crying, thinking I killed 6 million of my own people through this. I don't know how. I'd gone back in time, convinced Hitler to do this. I don't know. Something had happened. So that was religion for me, and this circumcision from hell. So done when I was 7. So all of this stuff really, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because without any of that, I probably would have some interest in a very liberal, progressive form of Judaism, and a very diasporic, non-Israel related form of Judaism might have been, something I would have been interested in. Maybe, I don't know, hard to say. But that destroyed it so much because it was constantly religion to me, and I explored this in all the books, maybe not in this one, although you could relate the sort of the MAGA part, the 5/3 thing, to a kind of religiosity too, because it's white Christians who are really clearly the beneficiaries of this 5/3 amendment. I would say to me, religion is force. It's endless force being used by a group of mediocre people against everyone around them. And that would drive me to religion. My wife is nominally Christian, not more than nominally. Everyone says she's Episcopalian, so it's all adorable. There's these sermons are like listening to Bernie Sanders speak, but without that wonderful accent, it almost doesn't sound right. And sometimes Jesus makes an appearance. But that's wonderful. It's it's a part of her life, and I think that's helps her be a good person. That's fine, but that definitely has nothing to do with how. If anything, my life's been a reaction against what religion has been done. It really had destroyed the first from age 7 to 15. Those were the hardest, harder than growing up Jewish in the Soviet Union with all its attendant anti-Semitism. This was really, really difficult times. Now, your mileage may vary. You may benefit from religion if that's the case. Good. But will Vera become religious? I don't know. I think STEM. No, you know what? I think by the time she does, Daddy gets her into Swarthmore. I think, despite all the stemming and stimming as an autistic person that she's done, she will actually choose the humanities. I think she'll be. Anyway, AI will be doing all that other stuff for her by that point anyway, but she might choose the humanities. Not creative writing per se, but maybe a PhD in English. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So there are a number of important things in the book that happen because of technology making decisions for people. So I wanted to ask your personal feelings about how you see that going, and the technology in the book. Vera has relationships with several technological items, and also the plot turns on things that machines are deciding to do.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. Look, I mean, technology. I'm not a technophobe in general. I think technology is good. It's what human beings do with technology and how we relate it, and also the pace at which we release it. I think this is the problem with AI, is this headlong rush into it without any safeguards. The same thing that pretty much happened with social media and other things. A train is a good thing. Trains get us from one place to another. The people that were absolutely scared of trains when trains became a thing were that was being technophobic for no good reason. But at the same time, you could use a train to transport people to a concentration camp. So a technology that is good when used for the right purposes can become one of the most evil things you can imagine. So but technology, because so much of this technology that we're looking at is not technology that cures cancer. I mean, it could, AI could, parts of it could cure cancer. People who work in the field tell me. But because so much of what we're looking at is stuff that interfaces with our humanity and tries to take our humanity away from us without giving us anything good in return. We saw social media do this. We're seeing artificial intelligence do this. It's kind of insane, the fact that so much of what we do. I mean, I do some work in TV, and my Hollywood agent says that so many writing rooms for bad projects, granted, are shrinking because it's just one kind of doofus and an AI doing all the work instead of 6 doofuses doing it together, right? Maybe that's progress. I don't know, but and one thing that I notice AI, and I notice this when people submit work that's been done with AI, which has happened to me, is that it can't do humor very well. AI doesn't do humor. It's one of the and wits and all these different things it digests all those things. I know I'm about to get a large check because I don't know if you're getting one because it's trained on your books. Yeah, nice. The only good thing about AI, but there's certain things that it can't do for now. But ultimately, you have to think of who is benefiting from this. Who is benefiting from AI? Okay, high school kids who get to cheat on their tests. Are they really benefiting from it, or on their essays or whatever? I don't think so. They're sacrificing a large part of their intellectual inquiry for this. The people who are benefiting from this are the same people as always. It's a bunch of people, in the Bay Area, who are people who also didn't know social cues, but they used it all for evil. Elon Musk is very proud of his neurodivergence, but this is what happens when you're raised by people who are. His father is probably one of the worst human beings that's ever lived. This is what happens when a child has needs that aren't met, especially special needs that aren't met by somebody. So, and these people are now using all this kind of technology to further rob us of our humanity, just for what? Just for bragging rights to having, to being the richest or the second or third richest person in the world. it's a real calamity. And the fact that no one is around minding the store, or worse, or part of the store robbery themselves, um, this is a very precarious time. So there are two AIs in Vera, and one of them actually is a nice AI, this computer chessboard called Kaspi after Garry Kasparov. And he's of Korean origin. And he's kind of a proto-friend to Vera before she makes a real friend, a human friend. And he came about because I did this piece for the Smithsonian where I went to Korea to research an article on their AI robotics programs. This was like 10 years ago. And it's truly insane. You know, when Korea decides to focus on an industry, they go nuts. I even met an AI robot that was a bull for the Spanish toreador market. So they were like, don't wear red when you go into the thing. So it'll just attack you. But the other AI is much more annoying. It's this car named Stella that drives everyone around. And as soon as you get in the back seat, she will try to flatter you. And what I didn't realize when I was writing this was that this would become a huge problem for AI, the flattery problem, where, you know, you ask ChatGPT, you say, well, I have a 70 IQ. Am I one of the smartest people that's ever lived? And it's like, oh yeah. I always knew it. But yeah, Vera does have that. I will say though that in terms of AI, I was just in San Francisco. I drove. Sorry, got to do the passive voice. I was a passenger in a Waymo, and I actually did find that to be quite nice because it didn't say a word, just drove. But I am fascinated by technology. I listen to horrible podcasts about technology that are just grating on the ears because these people don't know how to put a sentence together. But I feel that's imperative to know about the future that's going on because, you know, again, obviously I have a kid and I want to know what horrors await him.
I'm wondering, I feel like in all of your novels, there is this, you know, there's often dystopic elements and darker themes, but then, you know, there's always sort of the characters are very human and relatable, and I'm just wondering how you balance that when you're writing, or if that's something you consciously think about.
I do. Well, I think you're absolutely right. There's the background, which is terrible because I've never known, you know, what we had 8 decent years of Obama, but otherwise it's all been a shit show, you know. Growing up in one failed superpower, then moving to another failed superpower, it's not fun. But the foreground is people. Before AI gets to us, it's just people. And there's only so many stories. What are the stories? You're a child. You have parents. You want them to love you in a specific, unconditional way. It's never going to happen. You know, you have to negotiate a life with them. Then you have the romantic aspect of yourself, unless you're asexual or have some other approach to life where romantic relationships aren't important. But for those who do, obviously that's going to be a gigantic other part of this, of your life, the relationships with others. Then I guess the third leg of this, unless you have children, which is itself a fourth leg, is friendships, which as I grow older become even more important than I think romantic entanglements, because friendships really, and this is what scares me the most about this future, a future where AIs become your friends and where people don't go out to have a drink or to have any kind of socialization because they're all compartmentalized in their own little worlds. But I found friendship to be the most important part of my life. The connections that I've had over the years are a kind of story unto themselves. In fact, Our Country Friends, the novel I wrote right before this one, was all about friendships between middle-aged people looking back at their younger selves. So I think these wonderful kind of moist human relationships are what fiction has always been about. But then also couched in very, you know, in the terms of societies and practicalities, so that people in, 19th, 18th century literature will have to figure out who to marry so that they have enough money for the rest of their lives, stuff like that. There's all these, and then deal with all the horrible, you know, misogynist, racist, politically horrifying things that everyone has to deal with. That's also part of it. But at the very basic element of people, it's always the same stuff. It's always the stuff that everybody wants and negotiating things with another person. So that's all I've ever written about, and it's all I ever will write about. And I think that's what most people write about one way or another, whether they choose to write about it in a very sophisticated, ornate way or in a very minimalist and approachable way. It almost, each way can have its incredible masterpieces. So yeah, but thank you. That is exactly what I try to do with my work.
This is not up to me, but it sounds like this might be a good note to end on, and to begin your signing duties.
I'll sign anything.
Right. So you can thank Gary.